Hi everyone, it's Reilly. Last week I talked about ways that Americans drink, and this week, tomorrow, I guess, I'm getting ready to drink like a Japanese person, I guess. I don't know, that's kind of a weird way to put it. Basically, tomorrow, some friends and I are going to the or Saijo Sake Matsuri. I don't know if that's famous like around Japan, but it's pretty famous, at least near me. It's like a festival where you pay to try various kinds of sake, nihonshu, from around Japan. And hopefully this podcast will come out later today or anyway before I go to the festival. So if anybody has any recommendations for different types of sake that I should try, please let me know. I'd be interested. Otherwise, I'm kind of just going blindly. There's a few that I like, but most of those, are ones that I can get pretty easily in Kagawa, and I'd like to try some other ones that I haven't tried before, or that I can't get so easily here. Anyway, speaking of alcohol, I think in this episode, I'm going to be talking about places where Americans tend to drink alcohol, rather than, in addition to the kinds of alcohol that they tend to drink that I talked about last time. But before that, my Instagram is Reilly Sullivan XD, and Sota's Instagram is eigonosota. Alright, and with that out of the way, let's talk about booze. Oh, so in the intro there, I mentioned booze. Booze is a slang word for alcohol. If I use a couple more slang words in this episode, which is possible, I'll try to clock it to let you guys know what that actually means. But if I forget, feel free to message on Instagram, and ask if there are any slang words you don't know. But anyway, yeah. So Americans, I think, one major difference I think I talked about in last episode is Americans tend to drink a lot more at home, house parties or dinner parties, barbecues and things like that. But today I'm going to talk about places where Americans go out to drink. Of course, people go to restaurants and people drink at restaurants, but I'm not going to talk so much about that because I'm not sure it's very different from Japan, for the most part. For the most part at restaurants, people get a bottle of wine, depending on the restaurant, maybe a beer or something like that, but nothing crazy. It's not super different. But I think bars can be a bit different. I think bars being a place where people go, specifically to drink. Sometimes there's food as well, but I think often when people think of a bar, they think drinks first, and maybe there's food. Now, there's a couple of different kinds of bars. The first one that I'll talk about is called a dive bar. So dive bar tends to be less polished. Maybe it doesn't look so nice on the inside. Maybe it's dark. Maybe the floors are a bit sticky, or something like that. Dive bar is basically a kind of bar where people go primarily to drink. And when I say drink, I mean people go there like to get drunk. Now, not everyone, is vomiting or whatever, but like it's a place for people who like to drink more than anything else. And so dive bars will often have a few different kinds of beer, but usually not like any kind of fancy craft beer. For the most part, they'll have like your standard Budweiser and American beers with maybe a few imported beers. And then they'll have like easy cocktails, mixed drinks, things like what in Japan is called a highball, but what in America would be called like a whiskey soda, or like a vodka soda, or what else? I don't know, something like a gin and ginger ale, gin buck, or some kind of easy 2-ingredient cocktails like that. And then probably people would be drinking shots as well. So shots of whiskey or shots of tequila is pretty common, maybe depending on the age of the person drinking. Probably younger people would tend to drink tequila or lighter, I should say clear spirits like tequila or vodka. Maybe older people, men especially, would tend to drink whiskey or something like that. Probably won't find wine at a dive bar. If you did find wine at a dive bar, I wouldn't recommend drinking it. And yeah, dive bars are often also cheap, of course, because they don't they're not very fancy, and they're kind of designed for people to drink and be able to drink a lot or relatively a lot. So they tend to be cheaper than other kinds of bars. I remember a dive bar that I went to in New York had a specialty that was a shot of whiskey. They call it well whiskey. So well is like the part of the bar near the bartender's feet. So you can't see it from the customer side, but for the bartender, it's at their feet, and that's usually where like the cheap whiskey or cheap alcohol would be. So well whiskey and a can of PBR, Pabst Blue Ribbon, which is a notoriously cheap beer. So you can get a shot of whiskey and a can of PBR for, I think it was $5. That was in 2016 or something like that. But that was a deal. That was a good deal, and a lot of people did that because it was the cheapest way to drink, basically. So yeah, in addition to the dive bar, the kind of the opposite end of that scale would be a cocktail bar. So that would be, a fancier bar where one drink is, back when I was in bars in 2016, it would probably be like $15 for a nice cocktail. And these would be often these are original cocktails, not something that you've heard of before, but something where the bartender there, experimented and made a cocktail. And the cocktails might also change every few months or something, depending on the season. Those places, they're obviously for people who have more money, or maybe people might go there for a very special occasion, a birthday, a wedding, or like a wedding party, or maybe a bachelor party, before a wedding. And then, sometimes those cocktail bars will be in what's called a speakeasy. So speakeasy is a term from the 1920s when alcohol was illegal in America. And so in that time, there were illegal bars that were kind of hidden. You had to know someone to get in, or you had to be a member or something like that. But there were places where you could buy alcohol illegally, 100 years ago. Those were called speakeasies. Nowadays, what they call a speakeasy is often still kind of members only, or only for people who know, but is of course legal. It's not a crime to drink there. But usually there'll be like a place where there's no sign, so you kind of have to know where the door is. Or I've even been to some places where you'll go to like a regular bar or a regular restaurant, and there'll be like a quote unquote secret door that takes you into the other speakeasy bar. And so that's another part of it. That maybe because of that kind of exclusivity, that secret aspect, it allows it to be a little bit more expensive. Another kind of bar would be a brew pub, or sometimes called a gastro pub. So these are bars that maybe are half restaurant, half bar, so that the food at this place is important. It's usually pretty good food. And I think, it's probably the closest thing that America has to like a Japanese izakaya. So it's a place where people come to eat food and drink. If they call it a gastropub, gastro part means like food. And obviously pub is kind of another word for a bar. And brew pub, brew refers to like a brewery. So often, well, I guess by definition, a brew pub makes beer on the premises, in the back of the restaurant or something, they make beer. And brew pubs are pretty common in America. I would say almost every city has one or two brewery/restaurants, brew pubs. And of course, then there's also just a regular pub. Pubs are something that are, of course, more common in the UK or Ireland. In the US, if you go to a pub, it'll almost always be like Irish themed. People will often call it an Irish pub. There may also be British pubs. If you live in a bigger city in Japan, you might be familiar with Hub, which is a kind of British themed pub that's in Japan. That one is like a chain, obviously. In America, Irish pubs, there are chains, but they also they're very often not a chain, and they'll just be owned by, one person or one company, I guess. Now, an Irish pub would serve Irish beer and Irish food. So Irish food would be stuff like fish and chips, maybe shepherd's pie, which is like ground beef and mashed potatoes in a kind of pie, I guess, and other kind of Irish or British food like that. Let's see. There's also, of course, clubs. That's another kind of bar. Clubs are places where people dance and drink. Now, often the drinks there are also quite expensive. But I think for the most part, people aren't at a club to drink necessarily. Of course, they drink as well, but the main reason is to either celebrate with friends. People go to a club maybe for a party or something, but often it's to try to talk to men or women, try to find dates, and then or dance. Maybe people go to a club just to dance. That's definitely happens too. And speaking of dancing, a kind of regional kind of club is called a honky tonk. Honky tonk, which is like a club for dancing, but the kind of music is generally country western music. And there's often a live band that'll be playing, country music or maybe folk music, you could say. So people will often go to that honky tonk and they'll wear like country western clothing. So cowboy boots and a flannel shirt and maybe a cowboy hat or something like that. And that sounds like dressing up and like a costume or something. And maybe in some parts of America, in the north, there might be a place called a honky tonk where people are supposed to dress in country western clothing or something. And in that case, it might be kind of a costume. But they're more common, in Texas or in other parts of the South. And I think there it's not really a costume, but it's genuinely how people dress a lot of the time. But maybe when they go to the honky tonk, they kind of bring it to the next level, an extra level of cowboy, I don't know, cowboy flair, I guess you could say. That's about all of the main ones I can think of for different types of bars. Of course, there will be different bars that like specialize in something. Wine bars, or you could go to a bar that like specializes in tequila or in rum or something. Or of course those things exist. Or there might be like theme bars, a bar that is themed around I don't know. I'm trying Mickey Mouse or something like that. I don't know why that example came to my head, but you could imagine there's some kind of bar that has a theme where the owner is a really big fan of some movie or some character or something like that. That could maybe happen. Although I think that kind of thing is more common in Japan than it is in America. Yeah. Another kind of bar that I think kind of falls into the dive bar category a little bit would be like the chain restaurant bar. So there are chain restaurants that I guess are most similar to like Japanese family restaurants. So those would be in America, they're called like Fridays, Applebee's, Chili's. Those are the names of some of these restaurants. But these restaurants will have a bar attached to them. And so maybe the purpose of those bars is often for people who get to the restaurant early before their date or before the rest of their party, might have like a drink while they're waiting. But sometimes they're used by people who like to go to that bar for whatever reason. So they might not even get food. They might just go to the bar and drink at this kind of chain restaurant. In America, we don't really call them family restaurants, but that's what they're closest to. And those places tend to be close to dive bars in a way. The drinks tend to be pretty cheap, and the people who drink at them regularly tend to be people who want to drink a lot. Yeah, okay. This is getting a little bit long for a solo episode, but the last thing I want to talk about is a sports bar. So sports bar is really common. It's if I would go out to a bar with my dad, it was probably a sports bar. So it's a place where they serve food, but the main purpose is to drink and watch sports. So the bar will have TVs all over the place so that no matter where you sit, you can see a TV. And often there will be multiple sports on at the same time. So, there might be some TVs will be playing football, some will be playing baseball. There might be different football games on because, there might be like fans of one team in this area, but there might be an important game going on so that they should play both games for people who are interested. Yeah, I remember when I was going to sports bars, my dad was a fan of the Chicago Bears, and we lived in Maryland, where the two big teams are the Baltimore Ravens and the what are now called the Washington Commanders. So for us, when we would go to a sports bar, my dad would have to ask if they could play the Bears game, because usually we would be the only Bears fans in the bar. But anyway, this is where I want to talk a little bit more about bar food. I think many bars will have some of, if not all, of this kind of food, but sports bars definitely have this food. So the main one would be chicken wings. So chicken wings in America are, kind of similar. The wing, I guess, is the same part of the chicken that is used in Japanese tebasaki, but in American wings, they also use what's called a drumstick, which is a part of the leg of the chicken. So usually chicken wings have both wings and drumsticks. And then those chicken wings usually have a sauce. Maybe the most famous one is like buffalo chicken wings. Buffalo chicken is like spicy, and orange, kind of famous. But there might be other sauces. There's a famous sports bar chain called Buffalo Wild Wings, or B-dubs, people call it. And that one is famous for having like 20 different kinds of wings or something like that. Different sauces for wings, I mean. Of course, burgers will be common in pretty much every bar that serves food, and fries. Most bars will have nuts that they serve you. There's kind of a stereotype that American bars serve peanuts and that people like break the peanuts and then throw the shells on the floor. I'm going to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen that at an actual bar in America. There was a restaurant chain called, I think it was Texas Roadhouse. It's like a steak chain themed like Texas. And that place you could do the peanuts on the floor. But it's not super common in like a regular bar. Anyway, other things at sports bars would be like appetizers for the table to share. Because often, like a group of men would go to the sports bar together to watch the game. So they would eat like a big plate of different appetizers, usually kind of fried food, usually not healthy food. Stuff like onion rings, I don't know if they're so common in Japan. They're like, it's a ring of an onion, like a slice of onion that is battered and coated kind of like tempura, I guess, and deep fried, and usually served with some kind of sauce. And then chips and salsa, or chips and dip. It could be like a cheese dip or a guacamole dip or something like that. And then nachos. So that's like tortilla chips, same kind of chips as for salsa, but with cheese and different kind of like, I guess you could say like Mexican ingredients on top, maybe jalapenos, tomatoes, onions, things like that. And yeah, I guess those are like the main foods people eat. You could also maybe find hot dogs, other kinds of sandwiches and things like that. Yeah, I think there's actually one more thing that I want to talk about. I'll try to make it quick because, we're getting quite long here. Is brunch. So brunch is a combination of breakfast and lunch. And it's kind of one of the main times when people drink during the day. I think maybe the origins of brunch come from church. So people would leave church on Sunday. And church might get out at like 11 or something like that. And then they would go to brunch. So it's not quite lunchtime, but it's obviously too late for breakfast. And you might go with other people from your church. Nowadays, people just go for brunch on a Sunday, even without going to church. But it's a late breakfast, and often there's drinks there. You can drink beer or something like that. Is kind of normal, but the most common thing to drink would be mimosas and, I'm blanking on the other one. Bellinis. Sorry, they're called Bellinis. Mimosas are orange juice and champagne, and Bellinis are peach juice and champagne. And those are two drinks. It's kind of weird. You would almost never find someone drinking that outside of brunch. I don't think I've ever seen someone order a mimosa at night at a regular bar. They're pretty much only drunk at brunch. Yeah, and I think that's all I have for different places to drink in America. This, as I've mentioned a couple times, this episode went a little bit long, so I'm not sure if it'll be split into two. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know. Thanks for listening. Bye.